speak with Peter Warwick, who is the new CEO of Scholastic, such an important and influential company in so many countries. And of course, there's a real sadness to the moment too, as well, because many of you knew Richard Robinson. Everyone appreciated Richard. He had come into the business almost 50 years before his death on June the 5th. And this is a very lovely set of tributes that you're about to see. It's not very long. We'd like you to join us in watching. And then when you come back from the tributes we're going to show you, we'll have Peter Warwick with us. So let's take a minute now to remember Dick Robinson.
If you think about what draws people to reading, especially young people, it's the sense of discovering the world. It's the sense of being like the character. It's a sense of following the character to find yourself. There's something special about who we are and what we do at Scholastic that makes us different. And doing that every day for the past 100 years and looking to the next 100 is what keeps us relevant and ever present in our society and for the children we serve. It takes a village to do this. At Scholastic, it takes all 10,000 of us all over the world to make this happen.
If a book was written about your life story, what would it be called?
One of my father's favorite words was resilience. So I would say it would be called Resilient Richard.
I'll look forward to seeing that in the Scholastic catalog.
We've done this all together. We'll continue to do it together. Thank you and the individual child in you for your part in building this important company that we love and cherish.
Dick has been bridging the Atlantic Ocean for decades, seemingly always available with kindness and wisdom, a benevolent mentor, a constant inspiration. His breadth of knowledge was phenomenal, as was his legendary memory that stemmed from his genuine interest in every individual he met. He imparted generously his business sharpness and the perspicacity of his insight of people, of social evolutions, of world events. Comments and advice given lightly, with a deep, quiet voice, humor and sparkle in the eye, but decisive, clear-sighted, complete. How often did I use verbatim his words when having to communicate publicly about J.K. Rowling, about children's reading, about our mission as publishers, or the children we serve, as he said. No American publisher could reconcile America and Europe better than him. No one knew European publishing better than him. He was truly a man of the world, a world without frontiers. Yet his elegant modesty and discretion, and the fact that it was all children and children's books, might obscure what a giant he has been at the top of contemporary publishing. This did not bother him. Everyone who knew him for the great and good man he was.
A memory of a few years ago. We were at Scholastic party at the Bologna Book Fair. Dick greets me and suddenly becomes serious. He puts a hand on my shoulders and says, "Pietro, we have a big problem with Geronimo Stilton." Oh, I think, what happened? And Dick See, Pietro Geronimo is one of the Scholastic most important properties, but it's not our. And we have to pay you a lot of money every year. Then he burst in a loud, cheerful laugh, squeezing my hands tightly. I swallow and join his laughter. A great simple man and always cheerful, because he was a great man. This is my best memory of Dick. Thanks, Dick. Thanks, my friend.
Most of the great memories I have of our unforgettable Dick transpired while at the Frankfurt Book Fair. In particular, I remember fondly the time when, after rushing from the Italian pavilion to the American pavilion for a scheduled meeting with the outstanding group that makes Geronimo Stilton an enormous success in the English-speaking world, he was the first to greet us and welcomed us wholeheartedly at the booth of the Scholastic team. Dick always managed in just a few words and often accompanied by a witty joke to continuously inspire an unexpected smile from me, while always setting me at ease from the book fair's daily famous stress. I always wondered about what the secret was to his matchless charisma, and now I have found the answer. Dick was a man who maintained a sincere amount of compassion behind sharp wit wrapped in an enormous amount of intelligence. We will miss all of this so much.
When I joined the Frankfurter Buchmesse in 2005, I came from an STM publishing background. I needed all the support I could get from our industry. Dick offered his support generously and immediately. He joined our advisory board, was always there for me wherever we met, Bologna, Frankfurt, New York. Dick, I'm going to miss this friendship a lot. Thank you for being there for me.
Such touching words we've just heard from Frankfurter Buchmesse's Jürgen Boos and others about Dick Robinson. And I want to say to you, Peter, welcome as the new CEO of Scholastic. Welcome and congratulations.
No, well, thank you, Porter. It's it's quite touching to see the recognition that Dick's had, not only from educators and teachers and people in the US, but also internationally. I think the point was made that Dick was a great bridge between North America and Europe as a publisher, and I think that's a great testament to how Dick was. He was a very open-minded, intelligent, erudite, cosmopolitan publisher.
Exactly. That beautiful comment about how he was always available. And
Yes.
And I love the interview with my colleague, the journalist, the very small journalist, who was doing quite an interview and got from Dick the comment about his father's love of the word resilience and wanting to call the book Resilient Richard. I think that just says everything, doesn't it?
Well, it does. It was also one of his. It was a phrase that he used a lot, actually, inside Scholastic.
Really?
Is that he felt that as an organization, one of the things that we needed to be was resilient. And Dick would, even during the depths of COVID, Dick would remind everybody that actually this company had been around during during the 1930s, during the Second World War, and it had survived. So we were a resilient organization, and we were going to be resilient in the face of COVID as well.
Yeah, you really are a resilient organization, and in so many countries. I mean, the influence is just amazing with such outreach. And you, of course, I want to remind our audience that you have been on the board of Scholastic for 7 years. And so in speaking together now, I want to draw on some of the experience that you've had that illuminates exactly that resilience. When you speak of the pandemic, of course, which is something we all must speak of at this point, can you come up with for me some trend, something specific and maybe even unexpected that has emerged during the pandemic in terms of what children are reading?
I think what we found was that there was very strong demand for trusted books and authors, which perhaps is sort of symbolically what you might expect at a time of pressure, at a time of difficulty. That that people want to read the authors and the books that they know, or the books that the parents know that they want their children to read. So we had some surprising successes. A backlist title by Julia Donaldson and Alex Scheffler, Superworm, reclined the charts. And titles like The Harry Potter, Wings of Fire, Bad Guys, I Survived, they also did very well during the pandemic. And we saw the continuing strength of graphics novels as well, the sort of Captain Underpants, Babysitter's Club, Dogman, those kinds of titles. And then one trend that we also saw was that there was a rise in nonfiction buying for kids, and especially workbooks, which I think fits into this idea that parents were taking a more proactive role in making sure that their kids continued to get the best possible education that they could.
It's been such a difficult thing for parents, I think, and in many ways, Scholastic's programs, specifically in response to the crisis, I know have been very helpful. There is an element of this, however, that I was pleased to see, because at many points before we all went through this experience, you could often hear parents saying, I'm so out of touch with the educational experience my own child is having. I'm not seeing what they're doing. I don't know quite what they're reading all the time. This put it right in front of them, sometimes more than they wanted.
Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it?
I think it is, because I think one of the key things to think about with COVID was to what extent did COVID accelerate pre-existing trends,
right?
And to what extent has it actually started a new set of continuing circumstances that we all will need to take account going forward? And I think, clearly it accelerated, for example, the pace of technological change, and at both school and home levels. And it obviously, I think, expanded the migration to screen for kids of all ages. But I think one of the things which is definitely new is the one that you allude to, which is that this rise of kind of hybrid school and home learning, which was something of a necessity because of COVID and because of the pandemic, but actually would be a really good trend if it continued going forward. And I think it will do. And I think, therefore, as children's publishers and educational publishers, we have to take more seriously than perhaps we did in the past parent purchasing as being a key tool.
Right. One of the most impactful points that has come out of so much of your survey work that's so terrific every year has been this concept of how critical it is for parents to read aloud with children, and right up into some of the older years too, not stopping at 10 or 11, but going on with the adolescent side. It can be a fascinating development tool in terms of a young person's growth and in terms of a family coming together.
Well, I think it's also connected with the sort of social emotional learning of children as well. That idea of you're reading with somebody, you're perhaps reading to somebody, somebody is reading to you. It's a sort of physical. It's a wonderful way of sort of learning, and a lot of that's not present in screen-based learning, but clearly mixing different media together to achieve literacy and pedagogic outcomes is something which is already very important and can be very effective in the future as well.
Exactly. Now, speaking of the future, how, in terms of just business impact of the global pandemic, how do you see it affecting the children's sector? And what about exports, for example?
Well, in export, our exports dipped last year because of, it's really the impact of pandemic in either closing schools or closing bookshops. So, interestingly, we didn't see much of a fall off in countries like Australia and New Zealand, where we're seeing quite a fall off now because COVID has eventually caught up in those places. We were impacted in Western Europe because of the high street book trade closures. To some extent, it was offset in our particular case because we had a lot of success with the hardback sales of the Hunger Games prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So that was, the timing of that was good from our point of view. What we have seen is exports rebounding. I mean, we've just been doing our accounts for September, and you know, our exports in September this year are actually higher than in 2020 or 2019. So you know, things are coming back, which is demand is coming back, which is great.
That's very good to see. When you look at Asia, can you see specific trends there? It's such an interesting area and sometimes more difficult than others for us to get a handle on. Well, what do you see in the Asian markets right now?
Well, I think it's all about the home in many ways. Anything that facilitates reading and learning at home stands, you know, a reasonably good chance of success if it's quality materials. I mean, parents in Asia, in many Asian countries, have always been incredibly supportive of education and kids and so on. And I think that they're very concerned to make sure that their kids aren't falling behind because of the impact of COVID on the schools and society generally. I mean, one of the trends that we're seeing is that parents in Asia are buying English books to give their kids a start with the English language, even though they may not be English speaking at home. And, you know, we're focusing on this market as well with, you know, multimedia materials. I mean, one example of that is a collaboration we have with KT in Korea, so that children can engage with an audio reading pen, which helps with pronunciation and that kind of thing. And they can watch books on TV. And we're even collaborating with KT with an interactive sort of artificial intelligence device that can lend more sort of interest to the stories that they're reading. I mean, the area which is in flux at the moment is China, as I'm sure many people listening will know, because of new regulations that's affecting both publishing and indeed affecting tutoring. China was a relatively small but growing market for us. We'll just have to see how this all pans out. I think it's going to be a subject that we'll be able to review more at the next Frankfurt Book Fair than at this one, because the exact incidence of that is not yet really clear.
Right. One of the things we notice in our China bestsellers list, which we work with Open Book in Beijing to produce every month, is the comparatively slow change pace on bestseller lists of all categories in China, partly driven by the educational system, which of course is really controlling a great deal of what somebody feels they need to read at any given moment. Highly, however, as you're talking about in Korea, highly reactive to entertainment media. They are more and more a film development on a piece, just as in the West, is pushing a book right up the list very fast. So if there is a fast mover, almost always it has that entertainment medium connected to it in some way. It's interesting to see this.
That's interesting.
In terms of the wider market, then the worldwide market, can you put your finger on any specific challenges and opportunities?
Well, I think children's publishing is a bright spot, which is great. I think it's a strong market with an upward trend.
Right.
And I think that the pandemic has spurred greater interest in children reading at home in particular. So that's a very positive thing. But I think we also have some logistical challenges. I think it's interesting that the early part of the pandemic, that all the issues are around demand, because in some respects demand collapsed. We have this large book fair business, and you know, it was in many places it wasn't really possible to operate that business when schools were closed and there was sheltering and everything else. But I think as we've gone from the sort of early pandemic period where you know, the issue was demand, we're now in a sort of mid to late period of COVID where the issue is supply. And we have, all of us have got to negotiate some quite difficult hazards in terms of cost and availability of paper, container and freight costs and availability, container port congestion. It doesn't really matter whether, if you're in the US, whether it's Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, or even Savannah on the East Coast. There's tremendous delays in moving goods in. And then we have labor costs and labor shortages that are in every industry. And it's interesting, I was talking to a friend of mine who runs, he's the chairman of a supermarket chain in West Africa. So they have supermarkets and department stores in Nigeria and Ghana and elsewhere. And he was saying, well, we've never done just in time because if you're operating in those regions, you just have to make sure that you've got supply regardless of the circumstances of transport and everything else. But of course, we've got so used to doing just in time that, and it's not just the publishing industry, it's virtually every industry. And you're in the situation where you might want to sell a $60,000 car, but there's a 90-cent piece of a microprocessor from Korea that you can't get. Yeah. You can't sell the car. And we're in, to some extent, we have, like everybody else, having to really pivot to make sure that we can solve these supplies. So whereas, now we spend quite a lot of time as a management team actually worrying about supply and making sure that we can fulfill, the promises that we make to customers in a way that I think was not entirely predictable, say, a year ago or more.
I'm sure. Yeah, we're seeing this right across the board in so many industries. And of course, now starting to feel it, especially with the holidays coming, very much in publishing.
Yeah.
I have time for just a couple more questions I want to get to. You're the first new CEO at Scholastic in decades. What do you plan to change, and what will stay the same?
Well, Scholastic's a mission-driven company, and I joined the board in part because I believe that. And so, in terms of the fact that we believe that literacy and education can be engines for positive social change, that won't change. There's complete agreement, I think, amongst all our people that's a commitment that we not only believe in, but we believe in it and we'll continue it for Dick. I mean, that's really important. But I think the way we go about things will change because the external environment's changing. And I think that we need to we have to reflect that many of our customers would like to have and interact with different media more so in the future than in the past. I think we need to interact with customers wherever they are. And I think that means that we'll be doing more business with parents, either through the book trade or direct. And I think also we have, as an industry, and this was mentioned earlier in the seminar, we have to reflect the experiences of diverse and underserved communities more in our content and to some extent in our distribution as well. And to do that, we also have to be more diverse ourselves, as was made clear in the last panel. That's a really important thing for all publishers, and we certainly see it as being a key priority for the future.
This is echoing so much of what we're hearing right across the industry. It's very much a question of integration and of molding the context together in a new way. And I think there's great challenge to it, but I think there's wonderful opportunity to it. It feels so right.
Yeah.
This is a great moment for that. I want to ask you one quick thing. Lastly, we're coming right out of our time, but what made you say yes to a job like this?
Well, you don't often get the opportunity to do something and work for an organization that actually changes kids' lives.
Very true.
And I believe in the mission of Scholastic so much, and it's never been more relevant because we all know that the pandemic has exaggerated socioeconomic differences. It's meant that underserved communities are underserved even more. And it means that those people who have been able to benefit most have been those who've had the most. And I think that what we have to be able to do is to pivot, and a company like Scholastic, but not just Scholastic, all of us as an industry in children's and educational publishing, we can be at least part of the answer in being more effective in trying to make sure that we can engineer more equity in society, and we can actually bring forward socioeconomic change. And that's something that Dick believed in profoundly, and it's something that I believe very profoundly, and I want to continue his legacy.